Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand. And this week I'm joined by Zach Simke. How you doing, Zach?
I'm great. How are you, Matthew?
Pretty good. And we've also got Mary back with us. How are you doing? How you going, Mary?
Very well. I'm enjoying the rain.
Right. Yeah. Is it cooled down? Is it cold? You're in the middle of winter for you both in the northern hemisphere?
Definitely, we're in our rainy season here.
Yeah.
And I live in Seattle, so you bet it's damp and cold.
Well, we have a guest from Seattle this week, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
This a builder, and it's quite nice to go back to a builder who kind of specializes and just focuses on a small number of well-crafted buildings. We haven't had a small-ish building company on for a while, so I really enjoyed this interview, Mary. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Sean?
Yes, so I got in touch with Sean because I was interested in finding a builder who had worked with Cork as an insulation product, because I have been looking into some biomaterials, and Cork really does have this huge advantage that you don't have to cut down the tree to get the cork bark, which is basically what the insulation product is made from. So that's pretty exciting. I mean, that's sustainability right there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm really keen to get into that. But before we do, we've got a few people to thank for bringing us the Passive House podcast and everything on the accelerator.
Yes, we do. So a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thank you to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, and Source 2050.
All right, well, let's jump into Mary's chat with Sean Conta from Targa Homes.
Well, welcome, Sean Conta, to the Passive House Accelerator podcast. And you're the owner of Targa Homes. And can you tell us a little bit about your company? When did you start it? How did you hear about Passive House? Those kind of things?
Sure. Targa Homes is just me and one other person, Matt Cull, my site lead. And I started Targa in 2018, having come from a job at a green building certification company. I worked for a company called Evergreen Certified here in Seattle for a number of years. And this was after a career switch that I won't get into previous to that, but I found green building and kind of fell in love with it and found my way into certification, which is how I got exposed to Passive House originally, through kind of the green building world here in Seattle. I eventually became a Passive House Rater, as well as a Built Green Verifier, which is a kind of regional holistic green building program here. And so, I really learned a lot as a certifier before I decided to do it myself and started Targa to build cool stuff, is what I say.
And what a time not that you had any clue what was about to come, but must have been hard for a new business to have 2020 hit.
Yeah, I think Targa being so small is a little bit insulated from the larger market, just because, we do one or two houses a year. And so I've found that I've made that work over the last number of years. But yeah, it certainly has been, there's been some ups and downs for sure in the market.
And of course, I'm interested in generally the kinds of projects that you typically build. And would you say that your clients are interested in Passive House? Do they come to you because of Passive House, or is it something that they come to you just because they want a building built and you kind of get them to think about Passive House attributes? Which one is it?
Yeah, it's very much the latter. I want to say pretty much all of my clients, to varying degrees, have had little or no knowledge or experience with green building in general, or certainly Passive House. And yeah, they just want an ADU. Like, we built a bunch of ADUs to date for, practical reasons. Like, we'd all think, I want to rent it out. I have guests in town that want a place to stay. And so, yeah, it's our approach has very much been, that's great. Let's talk through this project. And by the way, here's how we build things. And I'm going to teach you along the way why, airtight construction with continuous ventilation is good. And rarely do I get a negative response to, do you like good indoor air quality? So yeah, it's very much a kind of bringing them along during the process. Of course, we'd all love to have a client who knocks on our calls us and says, I want a Passive House, but it's still pretty rare, And so I think, we found it's very much a education process.
And just out of curiosity, is there one particular attribute that is a real selling point to your clients generally, or is it just sort of the whole package?
It's kind of all of it. Yeah. I mean, and every project's different too. We'll get into this, but we don't do exterior insulation on every project. You got to kind of understand what the budget is, the building itself. So yeah, you got to be nimble, but certainly we try to bring as many elements of sustainability and Passive House to every project that we feasibly can.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned good indoor air quality. I was just wondering if that, or if it was,
I think that, indoor air quality, I think, is a pretty easy sell. First of all, like I said, do you like breathing fresh air is not something anyone responds negatively to. Furthermore, in the Pacific Northwest, we've had increasing wildfire seasons. And, when you have a really smoky day and everyone can see that, the average person now has some sort of concept of air quality, both outside and inside. It's like, well, everyone says go inside. Well, is the air in my house better? How do you know? And so, yeah, I think it's a pretty easy talking point. It's something that people respond pretty positively to, no matter what the reason or background,
Yeah, that makes total sense. Living in California as I do, I know what you're talking about with this smoke.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess on a recent project, you had a pretty great client who you use cork as the exterior insulation on it. And I'm curious, how did you decide to work with cork? And was that something your client asked you to do? Or was that something that you described it to your client and they got excited about it?
Yeah, again, definitely the latter. Yeah, that home we built, which was an ADU, we decided to use cork, completely independent of the client. But again, like I said, I'm talking to them. I'm saying this is an amazing material, and this is what we're thinking. And of course, we have set a budget that can accommodate 1 inch of cork, and so that came about because, like you had said in your email, we're interested in low carbon materials and really tackling the upfront carbon piece of construction these days. And so it started there. Cork is a, carbon negative product. It sequesters carbon. We have had builder friends who'd used it before. We were just real curious. There's so many cool things about cork that we can get into. But so all those things kind of added together to say, yeah, let's go for this. And the client was, again, open to that. And that client was had no experience with green building, but I think some of these concepts can resonate with really anyone, an all natural material that's renewable, that's low carbon, So we we explained it to them, but it was definitely very much driven by Matt and I, just our kind of nerdiness and desire to try something new that we knew was a very cool product for a variety of reasons.
And can you maybe explain what some of the reasons were that made it very cool to work with?
Totally. So cork, and I had learned this along the way. Cork is a renewable product. It is the bark of the cork tree. They don't cut down the tree. They harvest the bark and then it grows back. The cork panels that we use, which again were 1 inch thick in our case, the rigid panel, it's sort of crumbly. So there's some, install considerations there. But that panel is literally ground up cork that is then heated and molded. And the cork itself kind of excretes binders to stick it together. There's no glue involved. It's just a completely natural product. That was attractive to us. Again, the carbon sequestering aspect was attractive. The other thing I remember thinking is, when you use rock wool, for example, which we had used in the past as an exterior installation, there's inherently a bunch of waste. And I hate throwing things away, and it's inevitable in construction, but it really hurts when it's just like piles of cuts of this material, rock wool, that you really can't recycle. It's arguably natural too, but you got to put it in the landfill. Cork, you could literally grind it up and just till it into the soil on your site if you wanted to. We didn't really do that, but it's just, it's a completely biogenic material. And so the waste part felt a lot better for sure. So I think that's the highlights. It's also, R4 per inch. So it's providing this R factor. It does have fire retardancy. That wasn't a big concern in this kind of the urban setting for us, but all these things kind of combined to make us say, yeah, let's try this.
And how did you attach it? And can you just describe what your wall assembly was? And did you have to modify what you would have done typically in order to use the cork?
Right. Okay. So, our wall is a 2x6 standard framed wall. We have been using zip system sheathing for WRB and airtightness for a few reasons that we don't need to get into, but that creates our real airtight sheathing. And we applied the cork exterior to that. We did not have any particularly unusual changes we had to make to use cork. I mean, I think probably your listeners know that just using exterior insulation at all can be a big change for some builders who haven't. But if you're kind of in that category of, you know how to do this, there's not a whole lot of things that are different. Cork is more rigid than a product like rock wool, which tends to squish a little. So when we're attaching it, which we really used the rain screen batten. So this is a 1x4 dimensional lumber strap that we put outside the cork. So the way we did this, by the way, and Matt kind of pioneered this, is he would attach these long vertical 1x4s outside the sheathing, just at the bottom, and slip the cork panels behind it to kind of hold them on there, and then layer the cork up the wall, and then attach the batten to the stud inside the wall through the cork and through the sheathing as he went up. So there wasn't really a need to tack the cork panels up. And you could do that, right? You could put all your cork on before anything else and tack them up with cap nails or something like that. And then come back and put your 1x4, rain screen battens on. But we found it pretty nice to just do it all in kind of one step and tack those 1x4s up and slip the cork behind and then fasten them up as we go. So that was our method. We used, I believe, since it was just 1 inch of cork, I think we used a 3.5 inch, pretty standard construction screw. Our cladding was a light cladding. It was a engineered wood lap siding cladding, so we didn't have to worry about holding, bigger fasteners for holding something heavier like metal or brick. So, beyond that, it was just the standard considerations for having exterior installation, which would include window trim, little modifications that you might have to consider for a little added depth. But yeah, that was our basic approach. And I think it went pretty smoothly. I guess a couple other things I'd say about the cork is, like I mentioned, it's somewhat delicate. It can be kind of broken fairly easily. Nothing too crazy, but a friend of mine had suggested, hey, you might not want to have a sub do this, which we never really considered anyway, but you have to handle it a little bit carefully. It also does not take a pencil mark very easily. We ended up using a white pica lead. If people have heard of pica marking tools, just to see it, because the cork is pretty dark. So when you're cutting panels, that kind of was a little trick we learned. But other than that, yeah, it went up just like any sort of rigid panel product.
Great. And it was pretty easy to cut.
It was easy to cut with a circular saw. Again, like that marking thing was an issue we figured out early. It creates a lot of dust, of course. But again, this dust is just, cork. So it's not like something that is toxic in any way or hazardous.
And was that the only time you've used cork? Did you use it you didn't use it in the roof assembly, only on the walls, right?
Only on the walls. I mean, would I have used the roof? Absolutely, but it's pretty expensive stuff, and we just didn't have the budget there.
Mm-hmm.
We used it just on the wall, just 1 inch. Again, that's kind of all we could afford. From a building science perspective, cork is super vapor open. So even at 1 inch, you don't have to worry about trapping, having a imbalance in R values inside and outside your sheathing, which would be your condensing surface. So the nerds out there will understand that, but any depth can work, much like rock wool. And so, yeah, we just did 1 inch on the walls. That's the only project we've used cork for. We have been using wood fiberboard since then on a couple projects, which is a similar product, but it's a rigid wood fiber material. And we found that, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but yeah, well, that was the only cork project we've done to date. Yeah.
Great. Well, I mean, I mentioned it in the wood fiber material also. Was it hard to source the wood fiber boards, or was that pretty easy?
It wasn't super hard. We used a product called Styco, which I happen to know friends of mine from New Energy Works in Oregon distribute. And that's pretty much the only place you can get it on the West Coast. But New Energy Works has it and sells it. There's a new company called Timber HP coming online in the next couple of years that I'm very excited about that will allow us to source it domestically. But yeah, I mean
By the way, they're already selling product, Timber HP.
They are. They're selling their bat product and their fill product. The rigid panels are coming hopefully next year or the year after. Yeah.
Right.
Very excited about that. And I mean, the reasons for using that is I think it's actually a little easier to work with than the cork. It's a little more sturdy. The tongue and groove product, we actually found the cork to vary in dimension a little more than we expected in terms of the overall size of each sheet. So as you stacked it up the wall, we'd have like little gaps here and there, which I think thermally are not a big problem, but having a tongue and groove product was kind of nice. And both are, super carbon negative, biogenic material, similar R values. I think the fiberboard's a little lower. And so, they're both great products, but we've been using the wood fiberboard more recently.
And since you're mentioning being interested in reducing the embodied carbon of the building materials that you use, I understand you've been using a embodied carbon calculator in your work. Can you tell me a little bit about that tool and how it's working for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. We've been using the BEAM estimator tool, BEAM, which people have probably heard of. The free tool online. I think that, compared to some of the other tools that I've just briefly checked out, it's a real user-friendly, easy to learn tool, great for kind of residential scale analysis and really comparison. I think the key part of the tool is that you can quickly and easily compare different material choices as to their embodied carbon impact. So, I mean, to be totally honest, I've used the BEAM tool a handful of times, and it's a fantastic tool and can be used extensively to compare different choices. And also, it can be used briefly to just understand, hey, this siding is a better choice than this siding. Frankly, I think a lot of the stuff I learned from Beam. You really only need to learn once. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, materials that have biogenic kind of components are going to be better. Like an example is we started using LP Smart siding, which is an engineered wood siding, nothing too fancy. But you compare that to like a fiber cement board like Hardy, and it's quite a bit lower embodied carbon. And I think both are great choices if you're using a rain screen. So little things like that we use the Beam tool for to kind of understand that early on. And now that just works its way into our like standard spec.
Yeah.
But yeah, I recommend people checking out the Beam tool. It's a free access, and I think there's a lot of cool learning you can find from there.
You mentioned that engineered wood siding, which is great. Unfortunately, again, I live in California where pretty much everywhere you have to be really concerned about wildfire hazards. And
Right.
except for, with the possible exception of really an urban environment. And that's where you're building. So that's not a huge concern for you. Is that true?
Yeah, I think if the wildfires is popping up in North Seattle, then really we've got much bigger problems than the siding we chose, because
Right.
it's a pretty dense area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But certainly, if we're building even a handful of miles outside the city, it could be quickly a much more important consideration for sure.
Yeah. Are there other low carbon materials that you've been led to that you want to bring up from using the Beam tool?
The siding, obviously the cork and wood fiberboard. I would also say insulation. We really tried to use cellulose as much as we can inside the wall cavities. We're kind of backing off that just purely from an installer standpoint. We just haven't really found anyone in Seattle specifically that seems to have that skill to get the proper density. But of course, I can't. By far the biggest component here is concrete, and so when you use the Beam tool, you quickly see, oh, my siding decision was great, but the concrete is a much larger number. So anything we can do to get a little bit lower embodied carbon concrete mix, we try to do. I wish I had more kind of time and resources to work on that with the batch plants here, but there's definitely ground to be gained there. You essentially are working with your mix engineer for supplemental cementatious material, SCMs, which are used in place of the cement, which is the worst kind of component of the concrete. So Beam can help with that, help you kind of start looking at that. And we've been trying to do some of that, but certainly that's a very big one.
Yeah, and it's great to know where to focus your time and energy when you're trying to look for alternative materials.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is a great part of Beam. When you see there's a little graph on kind of the results page that's like a bar graph of the components and their embodied carbon. And like, I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, it's concrete. And I guess I would also say windows. Windows were surprisingly embodied carbon intensive. I don't know if there's probably less ground to be gained there. Clients tend to want windows in their homes. It's kind of hard to avoid that. My guess is it's a lot of the glass production, which is just takes a lot of energy to melt silica and make glass. So, I mean, hopefully there'll be better options in the future there, but it's just also something that's good to understand, and be aware of.
Yeah, definitely. So it's been really great talking with you. I just am wondering, so in your building, as far as climate concerns go, what are you most impacted by, and what are your clients most concerned about? And that might be two different questions.
Can you rephrase the first part? I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I just meant when you're building, like, are you having to sort of adjust any of your building choices based on sort of future climate concerns or near-term climate concerns, such as overheating? Is that an issue where you're building, or
Gotcha.
changes in rainstorm intensities, anything like that? Are those concerns that either you have or that your clients are bringing up when you're building?
Yeah, right. Okay, so two things come to mind. First is just like we said, the embodied carbon of the building has an impact. As probably most people know, we've gotten pretty good at operational carbon, but climate change is happening now. And so we need to be just as much concerned with the energy that's going into the products that we use in the building to address the more immediate nature of climate change. So that's a concern. We've kind of been over that. That's something we bring to the table. Certainly, I forgot to mention that another big thing we did on that project and try to do as much as possible is use reclaimed lumber for framing. Just something a lot of people haven't heard of, but is available if you poke around. We have a company we work with in Seattle that deconstructs old homes and saves the lumber, and we reuse it. And it's fantastic, and it's beautiful old Doug fir, and it can serve another 100 years. And so I just love doing that. It's lower carbon. Of course, wood is a good material in any case, but the fact that we didn't have to cut any trees down or truck them anywhere, it's just studs that came out of a house, half a mile away, we're now reusing. Just super cool. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Very exciting.
Yeah, very cool. So, but to get to the other part of the question, so yes, we are increasingly living in a world where heat is an issue, smoke is an issue, resiliency is an issue. Where I live in Seattle, we don't have a lot of power outages, but I'm not going to be surprised if and when that increases. So passive house construction is absolutely addresses that and provides customers with a much more resilient structure. And so, I'll be totally honest, we haven't sold that enough to clients. And I plan to start doing that more as people get kind of more familiar with that phenomenon. But there's so many aspects to that. Air quality, like we said, resiliency in cold snaps or heat, durability, just in general, are all the kind of tools you want in an increasingly volatile climate, even where we live. Yeah, for sure.
Great. Well, I appreciate your time, and I'm sure your clients are appreciating your ADUs. I mean, it's such a here, and I know there as well. ADUs are such a great tool for increasing housing density, and often more acceptable as a tool to other means of increasing housing availability. So it's great.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. Love what you're doing. So thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me.
And that was Sean Conta, who is a Seattle-based builder. His company is Targa Homes. And a great interview, Mary. What were the main highlights for you?
Well, I really liked, just for anybody who's new to trying to get clients interested in passive house, I liked the way he talked about, it's my job to be the person with experience, and my clients, don't come to me asking for a passive house, but I talk to them about airtight construction, and that he rarely gets a negative response to the question, do you like good indoor air quality?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a good way to sell passive house for people who are just, getting their feet wet and trying to get their clients on board with passive house.
Yeah, I really like that. Not focusing too much on the technical aspects of ventilation systems and high-spec windows, but just saying, well, don't you want continuous fresh air? It seems like such a good way of, who's going to say no to that? And I was also really interested because quite often we do hear about architects who get a name for themselves, and then people come to them already knowing quite a lot about passive house, and that's why they choose them. So to hear the other perspective, the other way around of people coming to him and then him saying, well, this is what I do and this is why, I thought that was pretty encouraging. I also really liked his attitude and the reason why he started Targa, which was just, as he said, he wanted to build cool stuff, which am I right, Mary, that he started as a certifier? He wasn't a builder to begin with?
Right. Yeah, that's right. He started out as a rater.
Right, as the rater. Yeah.
Yeah.
Zach, Sean's in your neck of the woods. Any thoughts about what Targa Homes does?
Well, yeah, I mean, he worked with Evergreen Certified and a very well-known company that helps certify and rate projects. So Tadashi Shiga is the kind of the driving force there, among others. So really great pedigree in terms of green building in Seattle. And he mentioned Built Green, which is kind of the checklist-based kind of local, similar to LEED green building certification that is pretty much ubiquitous throughout King County, so throughout Seattle and the surrounding region. And but really cool to hear that he does have this passive house focus. And I was also really enjoying the conversation about how to communicate with clients and the indoor air quality, and then also the way that he was also starting to think about how that his communication might evolve and grow into communicating about resilience. I thought later on in the conversation when you brought up, Mary, kind of what's on the horizon for us climate wise and how that might impact his work. I thought that was a really, really interesting conversation. I also, so not being a practitioner myself, was not aware of the fact that Cork has these natural binders that that kind of work their magic when the cork bits are put together and heated up in a new shape. So that was pretty cool to hear. Another kind of tip to the hat of Cork. And
Yeah.
and I think that the carbon sequestration potential of Cork is exciting, because then I can think of my wine drinking in a different light, which is I'm always looking for
You're going
that.
to save them up and make
That's right.
make some insulation.
That's right. I just need to avoid the plastic corks, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was really interesting about cork as well, and I've seen some stuff just recently about some video of people harvesting cork, and of course that's a huge benefit that you don't have to cut down the whole tree, and the bark does regenerate. So it'd be interesting to learn more about the scalability of that as a material, but certainly some pretty cool features from a product supply, from a carbon point of view. Interesting here, Sean, talk about beam, which we have mentioned here on the podcast before, and great to hear that builders are using tools like that and really thinking about the upfront carbon as well as the comfort and ease of use of those materials.
Yeah. Well, I think also what was cool about the beam tool conversation, which was, has been echoed a couple of times this month, one, notably with Chris Magwood, was that you don't have to model an entire building or get super, thorough necessarily with your modeling of the embodied carbon of a building to be able to benefit from the beam tool as a decision-making aid. You can just look at, I'm looking at these two different materials, which one is a better choice in terms of its carbon implications. And it's cool to note too, just what a great month this has been. This caps off a month focused on biomaterials and low embodied carbon materials and stuff. And it's been really, December has been full of great information, starting kind of with the biomaterials conference earlier this month, and now culminating with this example of biomaterials being applied in the field.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that interested me most about this was that it seemed the way he was describing their use of the cork, was it a board, as it not really impacting the rest of the construction much. Like it seemed like it was something very easy to add on to a building design. You wouldn't have to change the structure or the architecture in a massive way to incorporate this and give you. I'm not sure, Mary, was it an extra layer of insulation? This wasn't the whole layer of insulation, or how did that work?
It was his external insulation layer. So he had insulation within the structure, in the framing,
right.
But this was his external insulation layer. And he made that point that if you're not used to having exterior insulation, then maybe it's a bit of a challenge. But if you are used to it, then yeah, he didn't have to change his usual practice hardly at all. And I just also want to say that, so he covered it over with siding. And in other, I did an article on 3 different case studies. This was one of them. But the other two are using cork as both the insulation and the siding, which is a big advantage for cost reasons when you can combine it. So yeah, it's a really great material. And one of the great things about the biomaterials conference, which I really appreciate, was there were a lot of materials mentioned during that conference that I've thought of as, not well known to people and maybe only used by a few, but they're starting to become more commonly known. I think cork is one of them. And, you get a chance to listen to the biomaterials conference, you'll hear about a whole bunch of other ones. And that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, Mary, when it's used as siding, does it have to have any things added to it, or is it weather tight and enough as it is?
Yeah, it's weather tight enough as it is. And it does, I've heard that if it gets a lot of, it definitely changes color, like almost immediately.
Right.
And I do know there have been some problems that you have to think about a little bit, like, for instance, cats can use it as a scratching board lower down.
Yeah.
So you have to think, you probably want to think about that a little bit. But yeah, no, I know people who have had it as a siding for 8 years and it's fine.
Very cool. Yeah, and as I was saying, a really great collection of materials and information. So yeah, definitely head back, listen to those other episodes, and also check out the other stuff on the accelerator and also in Reimagine. Some really, really cool stuff there, and hopefully more that we see coming through as more materials and products come online. Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Mary. Zach, it's Happy New Year time, I believe, but we're rolling on with the Passive House podcast. You got anything else coming up?
Indeed. Well, this week we won't have our Passive House Accelerator live episode because it'll be New Year's Day, January 1st, 2025. But we will start back up on our live programming on Wednesday, January 8th. And the big thing that's coming up in January for us at the Accelerator and at Reimagine Buildings is the Reimagine Buildings Electrification Online Conference on Friday, January 24th. So definitely encourage everybody to put that on their calendars and to join us. The admission to that is $49, well worth it, and great opportunity to learn a ton about how practitioners are making electrification work in passive house projects, and what are the basic pitfalls and challenges that you face, and the great solutions to those. But you can also join the Reimagine Buildings Collective and get complimentary access to that conference, as well as all the other conferences that we do. These half-day conferences are a lot of fun. Plus, we have the Reimagine Buildings 25 conference, the global conference, coming up in a couple of months. So definitely encourage folks to head over to reimaginebuildings.com to check out that community if you haven't done so already.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Zach. Happy New Year. We'll be back again next weekend, New Year, on Passive House Podcast.